Hi, good evening. I'm Max McKenna, an administrative assistant here at the Writers' House, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's reading and discussion of Zift. If you have never been with us before, please take a second before you leave to sign our guest book, which is in the vestibule on the green cabinet there. We are lucky to have with us tonight two Penn professors, colleagues, collaborators, and if I may, friends, Vlad Todorov and Joseph Benatov, for our first ever program in Bulgarian Noir. Vlad is the author of the novel Zift, a socialist noir, which takes place in one bizarre and murky night in Sofia in December of 1963. Moth, our hero, wearing a musty, outmoded, attention-calling gabardine suit, runs, stumbles, and is dragged through a city wildly different than the one he knew as a young man, before he was locked up for 20 years for a crime he, of course, did not commit. Vlad has a knack for drawing unique characters and letting them tell their own sordid stories. We encounter a gravedigger whose only creative outlet is to build a machine for drying cat skins with his grave-digging tools. An employee of the Hygiene Commission uses his septic truck to get revenge on his wife and her lover. A man with both of his ears bandaged following an incident involving a soccer match on the radio, an iron, and a telephone that rings twice. By extending the scope of the noir genre, a mode that demands individuals, personalities, and eccentricity, to this moment in history, Vlad ingeniously challenges socialist cliches of uniformity and lends his novel a rich tension that plays out on the levels of plot, character, history, politics, and ideology. The 2008 film adaptation of Zift, for which Vlad wrote the screenplay, was called an instant midnight fest fave by Variety. We'll be showing a clip later in the discussion. And last year, Joseph translated Zift into English. His is a particularly thoughtful translation, at once considerate of Vlad's prose, of the English reader, and of the noir genre, which he renders here in all its deadpan wittiness. We're going to begin tonight with Vlad, who will give us some context for Zift, and we'll read a passage or two, and even a little bit in the original. Then Joseph will join the conversation and talk about his experience translating Zift, and give his own take on the novel's approach to recent Bulgarian history. We'll show a clip from the film, and then we'll talk for a few minutes. We'll have a little Q&A before we have we'll break for a Bulgarian-themed reception, though we had trouble acquiring chewing Zift. So without further ado, I give you Vlad and Joseph.
Thank you. First, I'll try to introduce the novel real quick here. This is my first novel. I wrote it in 2006. I've been considering myself a typical academic. Before that, I've never thought that I would ever write fictional stuff. But something brought me to this point. I don't know what exactly, but I'm sort of enjoying it, so I'll continue doing so. So it's sort of a parallel career for me, fiction writing, while I'm teaching and doing academic things. Mainly on the side, I write fiction. It's an experimental kind of novel for me personally, because I try to here combine two types of experiences. My childhood experiences living in Sofia in these days in 1960s. This is the capital city of Bulgaria, a communist country at the time, and my teaching and research in the genre of noir here, since I teach literature and fiction and film here at Penn, and a part of it would be noir films and pulp fiction. So I was really fascinated to study this here. This is an American genre in fiction and in film too. So these are the two experiences, one intellectual, the other one sort of like childish kind of thing, and so that's what I mean here. It's combined, and then I wrote this script for the movie. Actually, I was writing the script while I was writing the novel, in a sense going back and forth, because the initial idea was to write a script for a movie. And the people who wanted to do this movie, I mean, we were three of us friends. We didn't that much believe that the state, the government, will give us money for this type of thing. So I decided to basically first write a novel and not to waste my time and effort here of writing a script that has no future. So that's why I first finished the novel, it came out, and then all of a sudden they gave us the money, and the movie was shot. And it was, widely released in Bulgaria and in the world, basically 53 festivals, many awards. It was here in its general release here in the US. So it was a sort of an unexpected success, the movie itself. And that's the story in a nutshell, more or less. So now I'll read you a few sentences in Bulgarian, just for you to kind of, I could have brought any type of, you wouldn't be able to verify whether I'm reading and what I'm reading here. From Bulgarian for any other language, I guess. But, just to sound authentic. Okay, here how it sounds in Bulgarian, the beginning. Историята, която ще се опитам да разкажа тук, доколкото ми позволяват силите и паметта, които чувствам бързо ме напускат, започва отдавна, преди около 10 години. Краят ти се сложи с нощи, когато аз, гражданинът Лев Калудов Желязков, бях пуснат на свобода. На 38 годишна възраст аз прекрачих прага на Софийския централен затвор, където излежах присъда за убийство и грабеж. Бях излязъл в едно историческо време, а излязъл в съвършенно друго. Делеше ги денят 9 септември. Okay, that was the Bulgarian original. Now the English translation. So I'll read, I guess, a couple pages, and then what's the organization here? Then we'll show you scenes from the movie. Then Joseph will talk about the translation and other issues, and then we'll show more of the film. I guess would be more exciting than just me here reading aloud. Now you have to excuse my reading, because I'm not a professional actor or anything, like a reader, so I'll be stumbling from time to time here reading, and probably it's not going to be even, definitely. But it makes it more authentic. I mean, it'll show my kind of like that I'm as if I'm reading this for the first time. So that's the beginning of the novel. The story I'm about to relate here, to the extent that my dwindling strength and memory allow, began a while back, some 20 years ago. It came to an end last night when I, citizen Lev Kalurov Zhelyazkov, was set free. At the age of 38, I emerged from the Central Sofia prison, serving time for murder and robbery. I had been thrown in during one historical period, and I was released into a completely different one. What separated them was the day of the revolution, September 9th, 1944. I stepped out of the jailhouse the way many convicts before me have, and many after me will, with hope in heart and plan in mind. I had daydreamed much at first, but then I had started duly mapping out the remainder of my life of freedom before my pointless sojourn on this dumb earth was over and done with. A Chinese saying has it that a plan is a dream with a target date. My plan was one of the simplest I have ever heard, and it is safe to say I've heard a good many. According to it, after I came out of the Central Sofia slammer, I was to make a stop at the Central Sofia cemetery. From there, the very same night, I was to catch a freight train to the Black Sea port of Varna, hide in the hold of a ship, split for the torrid zone, settle down on a tropic isle, and swing in a hammock and bask in the sun for the rest of my life. I plan to visit two graves at the Orlando Cemetery. The first was that of my late son Leo, whom I was destined never to see. He was born after I was thrown in jail. The other was that of the jeweler whose death I did not cause, but ended up doing time for anyway. In that very grave, I was supposed to find buried the key to my half-wasted life. I'll skip a few pages here. The wall-mounted wired radio outlet at the central Sofia joint was feeding songs for the masses through the cool cells. Alexander Stepanovich Pavlov's invention interrupted the triumph of will and mortar in order to broadcast the news headlines, after which exact time announced the hour. It was 1700. I finished my 100 push-ups, an ultimate act of survival in the cell. I shaved as usual, eyes closed. I put the suit in which they had brought me here years ago. It was an old, stately gabardine, black as a raven's wing, robust in the shoulders and worn glossy in the elbows, theatrically flamboyant, as the district attorney put it during the trial. I was caught at the crime scene wearing that very garment. I hadn't put it on for 20 years. It definitely looked better on me now because I had grown bigger and I could fill it up nicely. I had bought it specifically for the robbery as a tool, intentionally big and white, but more on that in due course. I shot a glance at the darkened sky beyond the bars, and a fleeting smile must have flickered across my face because I said to myself, "You look at the sky and it looks back at you with a barred eye." I took away with me from the cell 3 things: her letter regarding the death of my son Leo, the glass eye of my late mentor and cellmate Van Voers the Eye, and the postcard he owned, which displayed the most sinister and absolutely hypnotic image I've ever seen. A chalk-pale, diabolically rapacious female chewing up a male who had fallen prey to her, turning his flesh into bloody pulp. I removed the postcard from the wall where it had been hanging for many years, since long before I moved into the cell. And one more passage. I walked out into the light of day, so to speak, and all around me spreads a nebulously thick, freezing night. The longest night, the night of December 21st, 1963. Darkness was crawling along the pavement like some mythical creature, and dusk was streaming down the joint's walls like molten asphalt. Right in front of me, stealthily, like a hungry tarantula, a shadow flitted. I froze, and the shadow turned into eyes. My shadow, my first shadow cast as a free man. It seemed strangely expressive and fantastically dreamlike, its shape affected by the movements of my suit. In that long and massive asphalt shadow of mine, I actually looked awesome, even borderline diabolical. I stood gazing at myself at the sidewalk of the deserted street, and I was just about to cast one final glance back toward the slammer where my youth was wasted. At that moment of utmost mental intensity, the sudden screeching of brakes disemboweled the darkness, and my shadow crumpled. I bristled as if the night had unloaded its living hernia at my feet. A Soviet-made Pobeda sedan slammed to a standstill right in front of me. The car was large and unnaturally bulky, something like a giant soapbox housing some degenerate life form. I lean over, meaning to peek in and find out what is going on. At that moment, though, the front door heaves open and a gigantic boot with a lustrous shine thuds onto the sidewalk. In the darkness in front of me, I gradually start to make out the contours of a massive, angular, uniformed man coming out of the car. I don't usually dodge fights, but at that moment something tore inside me and I felt the urge to run. But I was paralyzed by the sheer bulk of the body that disembarked and started unfolding right in front of me. By the look of his dimensions, build and composition, the man seemed more industrially forged than naturally born. This was some sort of monstrous hybrid between biology and metallurgy. A tin gaze, years of porous cast iron, a sheet metal figure, a quarry jaw, skin of hues of zinc and lead, a chest built like a cathedral, a face of lumps and clods, a ramsack nose surrounded by uneven areas of cheeks, and finally solid draws under his nails. After he had completely stretched out in the space around me, this warped entity gave a lumbering salute and trumpeted, "First Sergeant Varadin Lomsky." Then he extended a stolid arm towards the handle of the back door, opened it, and wagged a beckoning finger, while his larynx set in motion like a crankshaft, resulting in the following whooping wheeze. "Citizen." I stopped there petrified. I didn't dare move. At that moment, Varadin Lomsky pulled from under his arm a rubber baton and executed several finely choreographed wide swoops, slicing up the air around him. Then he raised the baton over his head and brought it thundering down on the car's roof, which resounded like an empty tin barrel. I came to and promptly jumped inside the car. So that's it. What happens next, you'll find out on your own. Okay, so what do we do now?
Maybe should I say a few words as well and then we move to the clips?
Yeah.
Or should we show clips first? Okay, maybe I'll just follow up on I think a sense of the novel that you already got from the excerpts and also from Max's opening remarks, and I just want to follow up on both a little bit from my perspective. Obviously, having the English language reader in mind, my question, and I guess the reader's question is, how would you approach a foreign novel, and how foreign would that reality be, and how should that be translated most properly? And I think in this particular novel, in some ways, the foreign reader, the English language reader, is not at a disadvantage, possibly even at an advantage. And I think the reason for that is the central premise of the novel, that the main character, Moth, as you heard, I think both from the presentation and from the excerpt, is thrown in jail shortly before the communist takeover in Bulgaria, shortly before September 1944, and then is released from jail about 20 years later. And I think this is the crucial point for the novel, that this Sofia citizen and a natural-born Bulgarian is actually equally foreign in some ways to the new political surrounding in his own hometown as he emerges and is released from jail. And the streets and most of the buildings and his old stomping ground and the neighborhood are all familiar, yet some new communist buildings have cropped up, but mostly it's the new political system that is foreign and that in some ways becomes the central quest here and topic of investigation for us, presented through these equally bewildered eyes of a Bulgarian who has not experienced those 20 years in the communist system because he's been behind bars. So once again, I think from our point of view, from the non-Bulgarian point of view, this is not necessarily a disadvantage, precisely because of this central conceit that the novel starts off with. And I think secondly, as you heard, and probably from that cutoff point where Moth comes out of jail but immediately is thrown into that scary looking car, I think from that point onward, what follows through most of the novel, through the rest of the novel, is a really frenetic, high-paced chase. You know, it reads as a very tightly structured plot whose main premise is that of a sort of a police chase, or our main character is constantly on the run throughout, trying to escape the authorities who want to jail him. And I think structure-wise and plot-wise, this is the second interesting device that accounts for an extremely fast-paced and carefully thought out and very tightly structured novel that is almost panting and out of breath as you read it, because it's a first-person narrative by that fugitive on the run. And I think in the Bulgarian context, this is an interesting experiment also, because in the history of the contemporary Bulgarian novel, you know, in the 20th century, tightly structured plot is not necessarily something that the Bulgarian novel prides itself on. It would be quite the opposite, you know, some kind of loose and baggy monsters who don't have, you know, a kind of a carefully thought out and consistent and kind of streamlined, straightforward plot as their central structure and guiding device. And I think, again, interestingly, the noir genre, that imported genre in a way, accounts, I think, for the novel's difference in terms of setting and feel, but also in terms of pace and its plot pace. And but while, you know, the novel is primarily this kind of panting and out of breath story, we do have very interesting and funny moments of pause and relaxation and kind of rest stops for us and for the main character on the run. And, you know, he actually does stop at quite a few sites and locations, you know, as he tours the city. But basically at each and every one of those stops, what happens is that odd and strange and funny anecdotes are told. These are different kinds of, you know, bizarre sounding urban legend type anecdotes that people around him, the local Bulgarians that he meets and encounters in each of these locations, tell him. And he's somehow always the listener and recipient of these anecdotes. And I think at those moments, the novel and the plot is kind of paused and almost frozen in time and stagnant. There is no longer a run. There is those still moments of very kind of odd and sometimes lurid, sometimes body scatological humor in some of these stories that people tell. These are very kind of down-to-earth tales and anecdotes that the locals tell, and in some way countercultural accounts, or, you know, anti-establishment accounts of, you know, what that surrounding reality, socialist reality, seems like to the people who have actually experienced those 20 years that our narrator is missing. And I think it's a very unique and interesting balance, I think, between these two primary yet disparate parts in the novel that combine very nicely. Almost an imported noirish Western sense of time, if you have, like a fast-paced, frenetic time, versus this kind of socialist, you know, or anti-socialist time of the anecdote, of the stories told when everybody's sitting, often drinking, waiting for a nurse to come out and examine the patients at the different kind of settings. But, you know, usually indoors in administrative buildings, in bars, in taverns that the stories are told. And I think the first clip we want to start with will give a good example of one of those
Yeah, it's
anecdotes.
the
right?
beginning of the movie actually starts with one of these anecdotes.
Let's just set it up.
But that's the movie actually starts with the ending. So these anecdotes, the anecdote you're gonna see here in the beginning of the movie, is actually told in the ending. But this way it frames the film, and also it defines the word Zift. So we can just see the beginning.
Do you
Just-
wanna?
Yeah, just hit play, I guess.
And it goes.
Yeah, and the sound.
I think we stopped it here.
Is the function key? Yeah. Yeah, you're good.
Is it on?
And this is the,
Should there be sound already?
yeah, there must be.
This sound on your computer might go up.
You wanna pause it? I thought I unmuted it, but I don't know. And over there?
It's on there, but it's not coming off.
Oh, you can hear something.
Not like before.
I'll manage to turn it up over there.
Okay.
Should
So we gotta go
rewind?
back, yeah.
How do we do it?
I have no idea. I don't know. of lenses. The anamorphic, widescreen, the present time, and 16 millimeters would be the past, and 8 millimeters would be the visualization of the urban legends. And here the image is not that clear, obviously, because of the computer and this, but otherwise it should be very crisp, I guess.
What's the other scene we're showing?
Yeah, the other scene would be the Mausoleum.
Do you want to set it up and
How do we? That's the time code here. Can you see? It's 1 hour 6.
maybe while we're finding the time, that the
We can show. Let's see. Maybe first. Does it show the time code here?
yeah, it's down here. 14.
Yeah.
What do we?
19. Well, then comes the bathhouse, I guess, and then so he tries to escape from a bathhouse. 46. 40. Yeah, this here. What is play?
Up here.
There were bathhouses, public bathhouses in Sofia. Most of the people would go there, and so you would have like a women and men, sections or what, right? And I mean, boys would love to climb up the windows of the women section and try to watch women bathing inside. And this was a sort of ongoing kind of a boasting who was able to do so and so forth. And that's why I said to myself, I have to get this guy inside the women's section of a public bathhouse, make him run for his life, but through this through naked women like this, just to satisfy this kind of infantile imagination that I shared once. I guess I don't share it anymore, but who knows. So that was the sort of purpose of this, having this kind of scene in the book and also in the movie. And then comes another one. which is kind of curious enough because you're going to see socialist buildings here of the city, of the communist city of Sofia, that don't exist anymore because they were demolished. And so they had to recreate them using CGI. And actually took much more time to recreate these buildings, the Mausoleum, than it actually took time, the time it took to build it. So here comes this scene when he. What is this?
Sketches by the comic artist, the underground comic artist Crumb, R. Crumb, who incidentally traveled to Bulgaria in 1963, the exact same year when the novel takes place. He was there in November. The novel is set in December. It's just an odd coincidence, but I think visually it's an interesting juxtaposition to see the kinds of sketches and also the kinds of, I mean, the image of a dark, almost noirish city that Crumb, as a visitor, depicts. Sorry, what were we doing here?
You have to go back, I think.
Here. This is one image, I think, where he says, "Arrived in Sofia in the middle of the night." On the top one, catching a taxi was a real bitch. I don't know if you can see. Oops. And then here, at the bottom, a depiction of not very urban-looking city here, making fun of the socialist appliances and how outdated they are. And he says it's a cash and carry system. You have to take it home on your back. And here's the party headquarters that you just saw in the film. He also depicted the Communist Party headquarters. Sorry, I think it's flipping by itself. And then I get the same image of him arriving at night. So these are just a few images, and this odd kind of coincidence. But in Crumb's depiction, strangely, a very kind of cliched and flat ridicule of Bulgaria that repeats the expected kind of Western Cold War stereotypes. And this is Crumb before he became famous. He's, I think, still 20-some years old, and he's still finding his true medium, and definitely not his best work and not his funniest or most sardonic, but visually just interesting in terms of the temporal coincidence.
And now, shall we show the ending of the movie, or maybe not to spoil it? It's.
Do we have time?
Yeah,
What do we do in terms of time? What?
It's up to you whether or not you want to spoil it.
Well, we can see the ending at a cemetery. It's slightly different from how the book ends, actually, but that's because, I mean, the movie's a different project anyway. So how do we get out of here?
I think you can just close it here.
Well, what's this? So the main character dies in the end, of course. I mean, there's no happy ending in noir films and Pulp Fiction. So.
Should we have a question and answer?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
We have a few minutes for some questions. Any questions?
So what exactly made you want to write a novel after so many years in academics?
I have no answer to this question yet. I mean, probably I have to at some point. I don't know. It was an experiment. I wrote it in secrecy, basically. I wouldn't share it until it was done, and then so we decided to go ahead and apply for funds, as they said, in the movie. But the initial kind of motivation, I really don't know. Maybe I got sick and tired of doing, I mean, for 20 years, what I've been doing at the time, and I don't know, yes, probably that. There is no great design or any type of like a great purpose in doing that, so.
Your English is excellent, Vlad, and you started to write a novel in 2006. Why you decide to write in Bulgarian, not in English directly? When you decide to meet with Joseph in order to have it translated?
Well, since it's a socialist noir, it needs to be in a socialist language, in Bulgarian. And then because of the movie, it was the main motivation for us, for me, to write it. So it had to be in Bulgarian. But then the movie came out, and all the publicity and all that. So, and then Joseph can answer. I mean, probably second part.
Well, yeah, I think the translation came later, but obviously Vlad is master of both languages, but in Bulgaria he has the additional reputation of being an absolute master and magician in Bulgarian, which is true, and people have, and in theoretical
It's
circles,
an urban legend.
Well,
It's not true.
most of the Bulgarian reviews paid very special attention to the more than ordinary register in which the novel is written, and people talked about ways in which the language is a main character of sorts as well, which made it additionally challenging, but also fun to work with.
Are you satisfied with the way the film adaptation turned out, or is there anything you would have done differently if you were the director?
Well, not exactly. I mean, the limitations, they're financial nature, basically. So we had to really, squeeze and cut down to the minimum. It's all matter of money here, this adaptation. Otherwise, I work with friends of mine, very close friends. So it was a group effort, so to say. But as I said, I mean, it's money. Had I had more money, then obviously it would have been different.
But it looks real. It's very powerful.
Oh, because most of the money went for lenses
For
for the
the cinematographer.
cinematographer. So that's why it looks real, because of the lenses. And we were aware of this, that this is movie, and for a movie to look real, you need lenses. All the rest is secondary consideration. I mean, if it's a novel, then the language. If it's a movie, then the lenses. So.
So you said you worked closely with your friends. Are you saying the actors were your friends, or just they helped you with the
No,
development of the novel?
The director and the cinematographer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How long have you known them? Is it something you guys have been working on or thinking about for a while, or did you just kind of call them up and ask
Well,
them to give you a hand?
No, the DOP, the director of photography, is my schoolmate actually, and we've known each other for quite some time. And the director is younger than me, but he was part of the group in which I kind of participated before coming to the U.S. During the communist times. So, I mean, yeah, we understood each other perfectly. We knew what we were doing.
Vlad, are you still writing a novel and shooting a movie?
No, I finished already my second novel. So the second movie is underway. It was principal photography was done it's back in September shooting. Now we're editing it, and it's based on my second novel. It's a different project.
Will it also be in noir?
No, it's not noir. No. It's different.
Did you write it in Bulgarian as well?
Yeah, in Bulgarian. We pitched the project in many festivals. We were at Cannes last year, basically, an official selection in the film market there.
Are you going to translate it?
Possibly.
Well, it's thicker and I don't know. This is sort of a much smaller than this other one.
Granted, I don't really have a full grasp of the narrative, but is there a specific reason that you chose to have the femme fatale live?
To have the what?
The femme fatale survive in the story? Since typically they're killed
Not
off.
to be punished?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, fate survives. All living people. So she represents fate, so she must survive. If she doesn't survive, this does not mean she's truly femme fatale. So she's still out there. That's what I mean.
Do we have one more question?
Looking for men to fail.
The people on the second movie are the same people who work with you in the first one, cast, directors,
Not exactly. No. The DOP would be the director now. Because initially the same director had to direct this one, but then because last year, this movie had to be done last year, but because of financial crisis, they cut back the funding in Bulgaria. They couldn't give us enough money, and so he went to shoot a movie in Russia, actually. And all of a sudden they gave us the money this summer, so we had to shoot. That's why the DOP directed it. And I'm quite satisfied with his job, actually. So it basically has the same crew behind.
Well, we have a reception ready. I guess we'll break. And let's give Vlad and Joseph a hand.
Yeah.
And there are books for sale, too, in the back.